The sun hung low over Dust Hollow, casting long shadows across the weathered buildings that lined the main street, behind Murphy's saloon, where decent folk rarely ventured after dark. A crowd of men had gathered in the dusty yard. The stench of whiskey and tobacco smoke hung thick in the evening air. Caroline Mercer stood on a makeshift wooden platform, her wrists bound with rough rope. Her blue calico dress, once clean and pressed, was now torn at the sleeve and stained with road dust. She'd been wearing it 3 days ago when she'd set out from Cedar Ridge to visit her cousin in Montana Territory. 3 days since the riders had surrounded her wagon on the lonely stretch of road between settlements. "Gentlemen, what we have here is prime merchandise." The auctioneer, a greasy man named Silas Wade, circled Caroline like a vulture. Young, healthy, and look at them hands, soft as butter. She ain't seen a day of hard labor in her life. Caroline kept her chin high despite the terror coursing through her veins. 24 years she'd lived as a free woman, daughter of a schoolteacher and a minister. They'd died of fever just 2 months past, leaving her with nothing but a few coins and the promise of shelter with her mother's cousin up north. Now she stood here, being appraised like livestock. "Let's start the bidding at $50, Wade called out. The crowd pressed closer. Most were drifters and outlaws, men who'd abandoned whatever decency they might have once possessed. Caroline recognized none of them from her travels, though she'd heard whispers of such gatherings in lawless towns where the marshal's reach didn't extend. "60!" shouted a man with a scarred face. "75," countered another, spitting tobacco juice into the dust. Caroline's legs trembled. She thought of her father's sermons about maintaining faith in dark times, but his words felt hollow now. These men looked at her like wolves eyeing a lamb. $100. A heavy-set man near the front grinned, revealing yellowed teeth. "She'll make a fine addition to my establishment in Nevada." The implications made Caroline's stomach turn. She pulled against the ropes, knowing it was useless but unable to stand still while they bartered over her future. 120, 150. The bids climbed higher, each number another nail in the coffin of her freedom. Caroline scanned the crowd desperately, searching for even one face that might show sympathy or disgust at these proceedings. But she found only greed and anticipation. $200. The saloon owner himself had joined the bidding. "That's my final offer." Wade rubbed his hands together. 200 from Mr. Murphy. Do I hear 220? Anyone? The yard fell silent except for the distant sound of a horse nickering somewhere in the gathering darkness. Caroline closed her eyes, preparing herself for whatever came next. "She's not for sale." The voice cut through the evening air like a knife through canvas, deep, steady, and carrying an edge of steel that made several men step back instinctively. Caroline's eyes snapped open. A man stood at the edge of the crowd, having appeared as quietly as a shadow. Tall and lean, he wore a long duster coat over dark clothes. A wide-brimmed hat cast his face in shadow, but she could see the firm set of his jaw and the way his hand rested casually near the Colt on his hip. Wade laughed nervously. "This here's a private auction? Stranger, you weren't invited." "Don't need an invitation to collect what's mine." The man stepped forward, spurs jangling softly with each measured step. The crowd parted before him like the Red Sea before Moses. Now Caroline could see him more clearly. Gray eyes, cold as winter steel, swept over the assembly. He couldn't have been more than 30, but something in his bearing spoke of hard years and harder choices. A day's worth of stubble darkened his jaw, and a thin scar ran from his left temple to his cheekbone. "Yours," Wade sputtered. "I don't know who you think you are, mister, but—" "Name's Jace Holleran." He never raised his voice, but somehow it carried to every corner of the yard. "And that woman belongs with me." The words sent a jolt through Caroline. She'd never seen this man before in her life, yet he spoke with such certainty that even she almost believed him. Murphy pushed forward, face flushed with anger and alcohol. Now see here, Hollerin', we got ourselves a legitimate business transaction. You can't just walk in here and... Can't I? Jace's hand shifted slightly, not quite touching his gun, but reminding everyone it was there. Way I see it, you're trying to sell my wife. Wife Caroline's mind raced. What game was this stranger playing? She ain't wearing no ring, someone in the crowd pointed out. Jace's eyes never left Wade's face. Traded it 3 months back for medicine when she took ill. Time's been hard. He finally looked at Caroline, and something in his gaze made her breath catch. Ain't that right, Caroline? He knew her name. How did he know her name? She hesitated, then caught the almost imperceptible nod he gave her. These men meant to sell her into slavery, or worse. This stranger, whoever he was, offered escape. Yes, that's right. She's lying, Wade protested. She never said nothing about no husband. Man doesn't let his woman do much talking when he's around. Jace took another step forward. Now, you going to untie her? Or do I need to come up there myself? The threat hung in the air like smoke. Caroline had heard of Jace Hollerin, whispers in stage stops and trading posts. A bounty hunter who'd cleaned out the Colton gang single-handed. A man who'd once faced down 5 rustlers and walked away without a scratch. Whether the stories were true or not, his reputation was enough to make several men ease toward the exits. Wade's eyes darted between Jace and the crowd, looking for support, finding none. He forced a weak smile. Now, Mr. Hollerin, surely we can come to some arrangement. The boys here were expecting to profit from kidnapping and false imprisonment. Jace's voice dropped lower. Federal Marshal in Cheyenne might be real interested to hear about this gathering. The mention of federal law enforcement sent a ripple of unease through the crowd. Several men had already melted away into the shadows. Cut her loose, Murphy said suddenly. The saloon owner knew when to fold a losing hand. Ain't worth the trouble. Wade's face contorted with rage, but he pulled out a knife and sawed through Caroline's bonds. Her wrists burned where the rope had rubbed them raw, but she barely noticed. Freedom was just steps away. Caroline! Jace held out his hand. Come on down from there. She moved carefully, her legs stiff from standing in one position. The platform creaked under her weight. As she reached the edge, Jace stepped forward and lifted her down, his hand strong and steady at her waist. For a moment, she stood pressed against him, feeling the solid warmth of his chest through the cotton shirt. Keep walking, he murmured in her ear. Don't look back. They moved through the crowd together, Jace's hand at the small of her back, guiding her. Caroline kept her eyes forward, though she could feel the weight of angry stares following them. This ain't over. Hollerin', Wade called after them. You can't just... Jace paused at the yard's entrance, turning slightly. Yes, I can. And if I hear about any of you running another auction like this, or coming after my wife, I'll be back. You won't like what happens then. They walked in silence through the darkening streets to where a black horse waited, tied to a post outside the general store. Jace untied the reins and swung up into the saddle with practiced ease, then held out his hand to Caroline. She hesitated. Once she got on that horse, she was putting her life in the hands of a complete stranger. But what choice did she have? Behind her lay certain doom. Ahead. She didn't know what lay ahead, but it had to be better than being sold like property. She took his hand and let him pull her up behind him. The horse shifted under their combined weight, but stood steady. Caroline had no choice but to wrap her arms around Jace's waist to keep from falling. Hold tight, he said. We're riding hard until we're clear of town. They left Dust Hollow at a gallop, the sound of hooves thundering against packed earth. Caroline pressed her face against Jace's back, breathing in the scent of leather and trail dust, and tried not to think about what she'd just escaped, or what she might be riding toward. The stars were coming out, cold and distant in the darkening sky. Behind them, the lights of Dust Hollow grew smaller and smaller until they vanished entirely into the vast darkness of the frontier night. They rode hard for nearly an hour before Jace finally slowed the horse to a walk. The moon had risen, casting silver light across the sage-dotted landscape. Caroline's arms ached from holding on so tightly, and her mind raced with questions that tumbled over each other like rocks in a landslide. "You can ease up your grip now," Jace said, his voice carrying a hint of dry humor. "We're far enough out that they won't follow. Not in the dark, anyway." Caroline loosened her hold slightly, but didn't let go entirely. "Who are you?" The question burst from her lips before she could stop it. "How did you know my name?" He was quiet for a moment, guiding the horse around a cluster of prickly pear cactus. "Heard them talking about you in town earlier, when I went in for supplies." "But why did you—" "We'll talk when we stop." His tone wasn't unkind, but it brooked no argument. "Need to put more distance between us and that town first." They rode on in silence. The only sounds the steady clip-clop of hooves and the distant call of a coyote. Caroline found herself studying the back of her rescuer's head, trying to make sense of what had happened. The stories she'd heard about Jace Halloran painted him as a lone wolf, a man who collected bounties and kept to himself. Why would such a man risk his neck for a stranger? After another half-hour, Jace guided the horse off the main trail and into a grove of cottonwood trees. A small creek gurgled nearby, its water gleaming in the moonlight. "We'll rest here for a bit," he said, dismounting with fluid grace. He reached up to help Caroline down, his hands gentle despite their obvious strength. Her legs nearly buckled when her feet touched the ground. 3 days of captivity had left her weaker than she'd realized. Jace steadied her with a hand on her elbow until she found her balance. "Thank you," she whispered, and she meant for more than just the help dismounting. He nodded and moved to tend the horse, loosening the saddle girth and leading the animal to water. Caroline sank down on a fallen log, suddenly exhausted. The events of the evening felt like something from a nightmare, too terrible to be real. When Jace returned, he carried a canteen and a leather pouch. He handed her the water first, and she drank gratefully, not realizing how parched she was until the cool liquid touched her lips. "Jerky," he said, offering her strips of dried meat from the pouch. "Not much, but it'll help." They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes. Finally, Caroline couldn't contain her curiosity any longer. "You're him, aren't you, the bounty hunter? The one who brought in the Colton gang?" A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "That was a while back. But you are Jace Halloran." "I am. And I'm not your wife." "No, ma'am, you're not." He looked at her directly then, those gray eyes unreadable in the moonlight. But they didn't need to know that. Caroline set down the piece of jerky she'd been chewing. Why help me? You don't know me." Jace was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and thoughtful. "Used to be a time when men didn't stand by while women were sold like cattle. Seems that time's passed for some folks." He paused. "Not for me. But claiming I was your wife. Fastest way to get you out of there without bloodshed." He leaned back against a tree trunk. "Men like that, they understand ownership. Tell them you're under another man's protection, they'll usually back down. It's twisted, but it works." Caroline felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I suppose you expect me to be grateful." "I expect you to be smart." His tone was matter-of-fact. "You're alive and free. That's what matters." She couldn't argue with that logic. "Where are we going?" "My place, for now. It's about a day's ride north, remote enough that no one will bother us while we figure out your next move." "My next move?" Caroline touched her torn sleeve absently. "I was heading to Montana Territory. My mother's cousin lives there. Said I could stay with them after my parents." Her voice trailed off. "Fever?" She nodded, surprised. "How did you—" "A lot of that going around last few months. Sorry for your loss." The simple sympathy in his voice nearly undid her. She'd been holding herself together through sheer will since the kidnapping. But kindness was harder to bear than cruelty. "What about you?" she asked, desperate to turn the conversation away from her grief. "Why were you in Dust Hollow?" "Supplies, salt, coffee, ammunition." He shrugged. "Town's got a bad reputation, but sometimes it's the only place to trade for 50 miles. And you just happened to hear about the auction?" "Wasn't trying to, but when men get liquored up, they talk loud." His jaw tightened. "Heard your name. Heard what they planned. Couldn't ride out knowing what was happening." Caroline studied his profile in the moonlight. Hard planes and angles, like he'd been carved from the landscape itself. But there was something else there too, hidden in the depths of those gray eyes. "You've done this before," she said. It wasn't a question. Jace stood abruptly, moving to check on the horse. "We should get moving. Still got ground to cover." She recognized the deflection, but didn't push. This man had saved her life. He was entitled to his secrets. As he tightened the saddle girth, Caroline became aware of how she must look. Dress torn, hair disheveled, wrists still bearing the marks of rope. "I must be a sight," she murmured. "You look like a woman who survived something terrible," Jace said simply. Nothing shameful in that. He helped her mount first this time, then swung up behind her. The reversal of positions felt more intimate somehow. His chest solid against her back, his arms coming around her to take the reins. "More comfortable this way," he explained. "Long ride ahead." They set off at an easier pace now, following a trail that seemed invisible to Caroline but clear as day to Jace. The moon climbed higher, bathing the desert in ethereal light. Despite everything, Caroline found herself relaxing slightly, lulled by the rhythmic movement and the unexpected feeling of safety. "Tell me about your home," she said after a while. "Not much to tell. Old ranch house. Left empty when the silver played out. Fixed it up enough to be livable. Got a well with good water. Couple of horses. Some chickens." "Sounds peaceful." "It is." He paused. "Maybe too peaceful sometimes." Caroline wondered what he meant by that, but didn't ask. "Instead," she said, "I can work, cook, clean, tend animals. I won't be a burden while I'm figuring things out." She felt rather than heard his soft chuckle. "Wasn't worried about that." "I'll need to send word to my cousin. Let her know I'm delayed. There's a trading post about 2 days north of my place. We can send a letter from there when you're ready." The practicality of planning felt good, like stepping onto solid ground after quicksand. Caroline began to believe she might actually survive this ordeal. "Those men," she said carefully. "The ones who took me, they mentioned someone named McDale." Jace's arms tensed around her. "Elijah McDale runs a gang that specializes in procurement. They grab women traveling alone, sell them to whoever pays highest." "Will they come after us?" "Maybe. But my place is hard to find if you don't know where to look. And McDale's careful. He won't risk his operation for one woman." Caroline hoped he was right, but something in the tightness of his voice suggested there was more to the story. She thought about pressing further, then decided against it. Time enough for questions when they reached safety. As if reading her thoughts, Jace said, "You can ask." "Ask what?" "Whatever's got you thinking so hard, I can practically hear the wheels turning." Despite everything, Caroline found herself almost smiling. "Am I that obvious?" "Just observant." He adjusted their course slightly, angling toward a ridge. "It's a long ride. Might as well talk." So she did, carefully at first, then with growing confidence. Caroline told him about her life in Cedar Ridge, about her father's small congregation and her mother's herb garden, about teaching letters to children in their parlor and the devastating swiftness of the fever that took her parents. Jace listened without interrupting, occasionally making small sounds to show he was paying attention. It felt strange, talking to a man she'd met mere hours ago about things she hadn't shared with anyone. But something about the darkness and the steady rhythm of travel made confidences easier. When she finally fell silent, emotionally drained, Jace said quietly. They sound like good people. They were. Caroline blinked back tears. The best! Then they raised a strong daughter. Not everyone could have held it together like you did back there. The praise warmed her more than it should have. I was terrified. Being scared doesn't mean you weren't brave. Brave is keeping your head when you're scared. They rode on through the night, two strangers bound by circumstance and an unspoken understanding that sometimes the only thing standing between a person and disaster is someone willing to say, "She belongs with me," even when it isn't true. Dawn was breaking when they finally stopped to rest the horse properly. Pink and gold streaked across the eastern sky, painting the desert in soft pastels. Caroline had dozed fitfully against Jace's chest for the last hour, but she stirred as he guided the horse into a cluster of rocks that formed a natural shelter. Need to rest him, Jace said, dismounting carefully to avoid jostling her. Been pushing hard all night. Caroline slid down on her own this time, though her legs still felt unsteady. The cool morning air raised goosebumps on her arms through the torn sleeve of her dress. She watched as Jace efficiently unsaddled the horse, his movements speaking of years of practice. There's a spring just over those rocks, he said, pointing. Water's clean. I'll get a fire going for coffee. Caroline made her way to the spring, a small pool of crystal-clear water fed by an underground source. She knelt beside it, studying her reflection in the still surface. Her face was streaked with dust, her hair a tangled mess. The woman looking back at her seemed like a stranger, harder somehow than the minister's daughter who'd left Cedar Ridge just days ago. She washed her face and hands, then attempted to bring some order to her hair as she worked out the tangles with her fingers. She thought about Jace's words from the night before, about being brave even when scared. She'd never thought of herself as particularly courageous, but perhaps surviving took its own kind of strength. When she returned, Jace had a small fire crackling between the rocks and a battered coffee pot heating over the flames. He'd spread a blanket on the ground and was laying out more jerky along with some hard biscuits. Not much of a breakfast, he said apologetically. It's perfect. Caroline settled on the opposite side of the blanket, maintaining a careful distance. Trust only went so far, and she was acutely aware of being alone with a strange man in the wilderness. Jace seemed to understand her caution. He kept his movements slow and predictable, never coming closer than necessary. When the coffee was ready, he poured it into 2 tin cups and set hers within easy reach rather than handing it to her directly. Thank you, she said, wrapping her hands around the warm metal. They ate in silence as the sun climbed higher. The landscape around them was beautiful in its starkness, red rock formations jutting from sandy soil, scattered with juniper and sage. A hawk circled overhead, riding the thermal currents. How long have you lived out here? Caroline asked eventually. About 3 years. Jace gazed out at the horizon. Came west looking for someone. When that trail went cold, didn't see much point in going back east. Someone from a bounty. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Something like that. Caroline recognized the closed-off tone from the night before. Whatever had brought Jace Holleran to this lonely life, it wasn't something he shared easily. She changed the subject. You said you were a bounty hunter. Was that your profession back east too? No. He took a long sip of coffee. I was a surveyor. Worked for the railroad companies, mapping routes through the territories. That's quite a change. A bitter smile touched his lips. Life has a way of changing your plans. Caroline thought of her own derailed journey to Montana and nodded. That it does. What about you? What did you plan to do in Montana, besides live with your cousin? I hadn't thought that far ahead. She admitted, maybe teach again, if there was a need. Or help with my cousin's children. She has 4, last I heard. Anything honest to earn my keep. Plenty of need for teachers out here. Most towns can't keep one for long. Too isolated, too rough. I'm learning that roughness firsthand. Jace studied her over the rim of his cup. You're handling it better than most would. I don't feel like I'm handling anything. I feel like I'm just enduring. Sometimes that's all we can do. Endure until things get better. Do they get better? He was quiet for a long moment. Sometimes they just get different. The honesty in his answer was oddly comforting. Caroline appreciated that he didn't offer false platitudes or easy reassurances. The world had shown its harsh face to both of them. It seemed, as they packed up to continue riding, Jace explained their route. We'll follow the canyon rim for a few hours, then cut down through Eagle Pass. Should reach my place by late afternoon if we don't run into trouble. What kind of trouble? Could be anything out here. Apache raiding parties, though they mostly stay south this time of year. Outlaws using the canyons to hide. Weather can turn quick too, flash floods in the arroyos. Caroline felt a fresh wave of anxiety. And you travel this alone? Usually, know the dangers, know how to avoid them. He secured the saddle and turned to her. We'll be fine, just need to stay alert. This time when they mounted, Jace showed her how to get up behind him more easily. His hands were impersonal as he guided her, but Caroline still felt acutely aware of every touch. It was improper, all of it, riding with a stranger, spending the night pressed against him, heading to his isolated home, but propriety seemed like a luxury she could no longer afford. The morning passed in a blur of changing landscapes. They descended from the high desert into a series of interconnected canyons, the walls rising like ancient fortresses on either side. Jace pointed out landmarks as they rode Skull Rock, where an old prospector had died chasing phantom silver, Devil's Wash, where flash floods had carved impossible patterns in the stone, medicine springs, sacred to the Apache and avoided by smart travelers. You know this country well, Caroline observed. Have to. Knowledge keeps you alive out here. Is that why you chose such an isolated place to be away from people? She felt him shrug. Partly, also practical, good water, defensible position. Far enough from town to discourage casual visitors, but close enough to get supplies when needed. Indefensible, you expect to be attacked. I expect to be ready if it happens. Made enemies over the years, some from bounties, some from other things. Caroline wanted to ask about those other things, but sensed she was already pushing the boundaries of his openness. Instead, she asked, Don't you get lonely? Lonely's not the worst thing a person can be. What is helpless? The word came out flat and hard. Watching something terrible happen and not being able to stop it. There was a world of pain in that statement. Caroline found herself wanting to offer comfort but didn't know how. What did you say to ease old wounds you didn't understand? They stopped at midday to water the horse at a seep spring hidden behind a fall of rocks. While the animal drank, Jace showed Caroline edible plants growing nearby. Prickly pear pads that could be peeled and cooked. Piñon nuts from the twisted pines. Wild onions no bigger than marbles. The desert provides if you know where to look, he explained, gathering some of the onions. Most folks see emptiness, but there's life everywhere if you pay attention. My mother would have loved this, Caroline said softly. She was always teaching me about plants, their uses, said God put medicine in the earth for those wise enough to find it. Smart woman. This knowledge saved my life more than once. They remounted and continued through the increasingly rugged terrain. The sun beat down mercilessly now, and Caroline was grateful for the shelter of Jace's broad-brimmed hat, even if it left her only partially shaded. There, Jace said suddenly, pointing ahead. Caroline squinted but saw only more rocks and scattered vegetation. Then, as they rounded a massive boulder, she gasped. A valley opened before them, hidden from view until you were nearly upon it. At its center sat a stone and adobe house, modest but solid-looking, with a well and a small stable nearby. A vegetable garden struggled against the desert climate, protected by a rough fence. Welcome to nowhere, Jace said dryly. But Caroline saw more than isolation. She saw the care in the construction, the way the house was positioned to catch morning sun and afternoon shade. She saw the effort it had taken to dig that well, to coax green things from stubborn soil. This wasn't just a hiding place. It was a home, built by someone who intended to stay. "It's perfect," she said, meaning it. She felt Jace's surprise in the slight stiffening of his shoulders. "Most folks would call it God-forsaken. Most folks haven't spent 3 days thinking they'd never see another safe place." Caroline studied the peaceful scene. "May I ask you something?" "You've been asking questions all day." "This is different." She took a breath. "Last night, when I said you'd done this before, helped women escape from bad situations, you changed the subject. But it's true, isn't it?" They were descending now, picking their way carefully down a narrow trail. Jace didn't answer until they reached level ground. "There was someone," he said finally. "Before, someone I failed to help when it mattered." "Is that why you came west looking for her?" "Looking for the men who took her." His voice was carefully neutral, but Caroline could hear the steel underneath. "Traced them this far before the trail disappeared. McDale's gang. You're too observant for your own good." "My father always said I asked too many questions." "Your father was probably trying to keep you safe. Curiosity can be dangerous." They were approaching the house now. Caroline could see it more clearly. Thick walls that would stay cool in summer and warm in winter. Small windows positioned for defense as much as light. A solid door that would bar against unwelcome visitors. "I'm not afraid of dangerous knowledge," she said quietly. "I'm afraid of being kept in the dark while others make decisions about my life." Jace reined in the horse near the stable. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then he said, "Her name was Emma. We were going to be married." The simple statement hit Caroline like a physical blow. She thought of his quick action at the auction, the practiced way he'd claimed her as his wife. He'd done it before, or tried to. "I'm sorry," she whispered. It was a long time ago, but the tightness in his voice suggested otherwise. He dismounted and reached up to help her down. "Come on, let's get you settled." As her feet touched the ground of what would be her temporary refuge, Caroline realized she'd been wrong about Jace Halloran. He wasn't just a bounty hunter who'd happened to save her. He was a man hunting redemption, trying to save her because he'd failed to save someone else. The knowledge should have frightened her. Instead, it made her trust him more. A man driven by old guilt would die before letting the same tragedy happen twice. The interior of Jace's home was a study in contradictions. Rough-hewn furniture spoke of a man's practical touch, yet everything was meticulously clean. Books lined a shelf made from planks and river stones, volumes on surveying and geography mixed with well-worn copies of Shakespeare and Virgil. A faded quilt covered the narrow bed in the corner, its pattern suggesting feminine hands from long ago. "It's not much," Jace said, setting Caroline's meager belongings, just the clothes on her back, really near the door. "But it's solid, safe." Caroline turned slowly, taking it all in. The main room served as kitchen, dining, and living space combined. A cast-iron stove dominated one wall, with neatly arranged pots hanging above it. Through an open doorway, she glimpsed a smaller room with another bed. "You'll take the bedroom," Jace said, following her gaze. "I'll bunk out here." "I couldn't take your bed." "You could and you will." His tone brooked no argument. "There's a trunk in there with some clothes. They'll be too big, but better than what you're wearing now." Caroline looked down at her torn, filthy dress, pride warred with practicality. "Whose clothes?" "Bought them from a traveling merchant couple years back. Figured they might be useful someday." He moved to the stove, not meeting her eyes. "Why don't you get cleaned up while I see to the horse there's water in the pitcher, soap on the washstand?" He left before she could respond, the door closing firmly behind him. Caroline stood alone in the quiet space, overwhelmed by the sudden privacy after days of captivity and exposure. Slowly, she made her way to the bedroom. It was sparse but comfortable. The bed was larger than the one in the main room, with a proper mattress instead of a straw tick. A washstand stood in the corner with a blue-patterned pitcher and basin. The promised trunk sat at the foot of the bed, its leather straps worn but intact. Caroline opened it carefully, half afraid of what she might find, but there were only clothes. As Jace had said, simple dresses in practical fabrics, undergarments, a nightgown, even a pair of sturdy boots. Everything was clean but had the musty smell of long storage. She selected a brown calico dress that looked like it might nearly fit and laid it on the bed. Then, moving like a woman in a dream, she poured water into the basin and began the process of washing away the nightmare of the past 3 days. The soap was harsh lye soap, but it felt like luxury against her skin. She scrubbed until her flesh was pink, then worked on her hair, wincing as she encountered matted sections. By the time she finished, the water was murky gray, and she felt more human than she had since leaving Cedar Ridge. The dress was indeed too large, hanging loose at the waist and shoulders, but it was clean and whole. She used a strip torn from her ruined petticoat to belt it tighter. The boots were also too big, but better than her torn shoes. Looking at herself in the small mirror above the washstand, Caroline barely recognized the woman staring back thinner, harder, with shadows under her eyes that hadn't been there a week ago. When she emerged from the bedroom, she found Jace at the stove, stirring something that smelled like heaven. He'd washed too. His hair was damp and he'd changed into a clean shirt. "Rabbit stew," he said without turning. "Shot it this morning before I went to town. Figured I'd have it for supper, but it'll do for late lunch instead." "It smells wonderful." Caroline's stomach growled audibly, reminding her that jerky and biscuits were poor sustenance after her ordeal. "Sit," he gestured to the table. "It's ready." They ate in companionable silence, Caroline trying not to wolf down the food like a starving animal. The stew was simple but flavorful, with wild onions and herbs she couldn't identify. "This is delicious," she said when she'd taken the edge off her hunger. "The spices." "Desert sage and some other plants. Learned from an old Apache woman who used to trade at Fort Buchanan." He pushed the bread plate closer to her. "Eat. You need to build your strength back up. You keep feeding me like this, I won't fit in these borrowed clothes." "They're not borrowed. They're yours now." Caroline set down her spoon. "I can't just take—" "You can and you will." He echoed his earlier words with a slight smile. "No use to anyone sitting in that trunk." "Why did you really buy women's clothes? Jace—" His smile faded. He stood and moved to the window, looking out at the desert. "Hope, I guess, foolish hope that maybe someday—" He shook his head. "Doesn't matter now." "It matters," Caroline said softly. "Everything we've lost matters." He turned to look at her then, really look at her, and she saw the depth of pain he'd been hiding behind that controlled exterior. 3 years. 3 years I've been hunting them, and I'm no closer than when I started. Tell me about her, about Emma." Jace returned to the table but didn't sit. His fingers traced patterns on the worn wood. "We grew up in the same town in Missouri. Her father owned the general store. Mine was the town blacksmith. I loved her from the time we were children, but I was too tongue-tied to say so until I came back from surveying work with enough saved to offer her a proper home." Caroline waited, sensing that the words had been locked inside him for too long. She said yes. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Couldn't believe it. Beautiful Emma Hartwell wanting to marry a rough surveyor who spent more time with instruments and maps than people. We were going to be married that October. I went back out for one last job, to earn enough to buy a piece of land we'd had our eye on." His hands stilled on the table. "While I was gone, she went to visit her sister in Kansas. Never made it. Stage was hit by raiders. Everyone killed except the women. Emma and 2 others were taken. McDale. Him and his gang, though I didn't know his name then. Just knew that by the time I got back and learned what happened, The trail was already cold. The army tried for a few weeks, then gave up. Said the women were likely sold south of the border. Impossible to trace. But you didn't give up. No. The word was granite hard. Sold everything I owned. Learned to track, learned to shoot. Learned to hunt men instead of surveying land. Followed every rumor, every whisper. Got good enough at it that people started paying me to find others. Turned out I had a talent for hunting. And you traced them here? As far as Dust Hollow, McDale uses it as a way station sometimes. But he's like smoke, never stays in one place long, never uses the same route twice. I've been waiting, watching, hoping to catch wind of him. Understanding dawned on Caroline. That's why you were in town, not just for supplies. I go every few weeks, listen to the talk. When I heard about the auction, he met her eyes. I couldn't let it happen again. Not when I could stop it. Caroline reached across the table, covering his hand with hers. He went very still at the touch. You did stop it. You saved me. One woman saved doesn't bring back the one I lost. No, but it means something. To me, it means everything. They sat like that for a long moment. Her hand on his, a connection forged from shared pain and understanding. Finally, Jace gently withdrew his hand and stood. You should rest. Real bed, real safety. Your body needs to recover from the strain. What will you do? Check the perimeter, see to the animals. Usual chores. This place doesn't run itself. Caroline recognized the deflection, but allowed it. They'd shared enough heavy truths for one day. Is there anything I can help with? Rest, he repeated firmly. Tomorrow, if you're feeling up to it, we can talk about what comes next. Whether you still want to go to Montana or... He shrugged. Just thinking out loud, rest now. Caroline retreated to the bedroom but didn't lie down immediately. Instead, she sat on the edge of the bed, processing everything she'd learned. Jace Halloran wasn't just her rescuer. He was a man shaped by loss, driven by a quest that had consumed 3 years of his life. And she was a complication in that quest, a detour from his vigil. Yet he'd taken the detour without hesitation. Through the small window, she could see him moving around outside, checking the fence lines with the methodical care of someone who'd learned that survival lay in the details. His movements were economical, purposeful, but she caught him pausing occasionally to scan the horizon, and she knew he wasn't just looking for threats. He was looking for ghosts. Finally, exhaustion won. Caroline lay down on the bed, the first real bed she'd been in since leaving home. The mattress was firm but comfortable. The quilt smelled of sage and sunshine. She meant to rest for just a few minutes, but sleep claimed her almost instantly. She dreamed of auctions and gunshots, of riding through darkness with strong arms keeping her safe. But mostly she dreamed of gray eyes filled with old sorrow, and the quiet words, "One woman saved doesn't bring back the one I lost." When she woke, the room was dim with approaching twilight. Through the doorway, she could hear Jace moving quietly in the main room, the clink of dishes suggesting he was preparing another meal. The domesticity of it struck her. This strange, temporary home where 2 damaged souls had washed up like driftwood after a storm. Caroline rose and smoothed her borrowed dress. Tomorrow they would talk about the future, about Montana and cousins and what came next. But tonight, she was safe. Tonight, she was not alone. And for now, that was enough. She stepped into the main room to find Jace lighting an oil lamp against the gathering darkness. He looked up at her approach, and something in his expression softened. Feel better? Much. She moved to help him with the lamp, their hands brushing as they adjusted the wick. Thank you for everything. You've already thanked me. Not nearly enough. He smiled then, a real smile that transformed his stern features. Come eat supper. We've got biscuits and beans, and I found some wild honey yesterday. Not fancy, but it's filling. As they settled at the table, Caroline felt something she hadn't expected to feel again so soon, the stirring of hope. Not for what was lost, that would always ache, but for what might still be found, even in this unlikely refuge with an unlikely guardian. Outside, the desert sang its evening song of cooling stone and stirring creatures. Inside, two people shared a simple meal, building the fragile beginnings of trust from the ashes of their separate griefs. The days fell into a rhythm as natural as breathing. Caroline would wake to find Jace already up. Coffee brewing on the stove and the early morning chores done. They'd share breakfast in comfortable silence, then go about their separate tasks. She took over the cooking and household duties while he tended the animals and maintained their defenses. In the evenings, they'd sit by lamplight, sometimes talking, sometimes just existing in the same space. It was on the fifth evening that Caroline finally asked the question that had been building inside her. "Tell me about McDale's gang. Everything you know." Jace looked up from the rifle he was cleaning. "Why?" "Because I need to understand. These men took 3 days of my life. They would have taken all of it if not for you. I can't just pretend it didn't happen." He set down the rifle parts carefully. "What do you want to know?" "Everything. How many are there? Where do they operate? Why hasn't the law stopped them?" "The law?" Jace's laugh was bitter. "Out here, the law is whoever has the most guns and the will to use them. McDale's got both. As for numbers, it varies. Core group of maybe 8 men, but they pick up others when needed. Drifters, outlaws looking for easy money. And they just take women. Among other things, they raid isolated homesteads, hit stages when they can, rustle cattle. But yeah, taking women is their specialty. McDale's got connections in mining camps, border towns, places where men outnumber women 50 to 1 and aren't particular about how they get company." Caroline's stomach turned, but she pressed on. "You said you'd been tracking them for 3 years. What have you learned?" Jace stood and moved to a chest in the corner. He pulled out a leather portfolio and spread its contents on the table. Maps, wanted posters, newspaper clippings, pages of notes in his neat handwriting. Elijah McDale, originally from Tennessee, fought in the war. Came west after, like a lot of men who'd developed a taste for violence. His right hand is Tom Brennan, mean as a snake and twice as quick. Then there's the Vasquez brothers, Miguel and Carlos. Jake Henley, who'd sell his mother for drinking money. Few others who come and go. Caroline studied the wanted posters. The faces staring back were hard, cruel, the kind that populated her nightmares now. "This one," she said, pointing to a sketch of a man with a scar bisecting his left eyebrow. "He was there, at the auction." "Brennan." Jace's voice went cold. "He was there." "Doing the bidding. Said I'd make a fine addition to some establishment in Nevada." Something dangerous flickered in Jace's eyes. "If I'd known he was there." "You'd have what taken on the whole town." Caroline shook her head. "You played it smart. Got me out without bloodshed. This time..." He gathered the papers back up. "But someday there'll be a reckoning." "Is that what you want, a showdown?" Jace was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "I used to think so. Used to dream about it, facing down McDale, making him pay for Emma and all the others. But lately, he looked at her across the table. Lately, I wonder if I've let revenge eat up too much of my life. Emma wouldn't have wanted that. She was gentle, kind, hated violence of any sort. What would she have wanted? For me to live, to find some measure of peace." He smiled sadly. "To use my surveying skills for something other than tracking killers." Caroline felt a pang that might have been jealousy, which was absurd. How could she be jealous of a dead woman? Yet hearing Jace speak of Emma with such tenderness stirred something uncomfortable in her chest. "Do you think you ever could find peace? I mean..." "I'm beginning to think it's possible." His eyes met hers meaningfully before he looked away. "But not while McDale's out there. Not while he's doing to other women what he did to Emma. Then we stop him." The words hung in the air between them. Jace stared at her. You've been hunting alone for 3 years. Maybe it's time to try a different approach. Absolutely not. I didn't save you from those men just to put you back in danger. You didn't save me at all, Caroline said firmly. We saved each other. You gave me a way out. I played along with your story. Partnership. That was different. How? Because I didn't have a choice then. She leaned forward. I have a choice now, and I choose to fight back. These men stole my freedom. Would have stolen my life. I can't just run to Montana and pretend it didn't happen. Caroline, I can learn. You've already started teaching me to shoot. I can ride. I'm not afraid of hard work or hardship. And I have something you don't. What's that? They don't know me. To McDale's gang, I'm just another woman who got away. They won't expect me to come after them. Jace pushed back from the table, pacing to the window. You don't know what you're asking. This isn't some dime novel adventure. These men are killers. What they do to women, they capture. He couldn't finish the sentence. I know exactly what they do. I spent 3 days imagining it, waiting for it. Caroline's voice was steady despite the tremor in her hands. That's why they need to be stopped. Not by you. Then, by who the law that doesn't exist out here, the army that gave up after a few weeks. You, hunting alone until they eventually figure out who you are and put a bullet in your back. He whirled to face her. Better me than you. Why? Because you're a man. Because you've got nothing left to lose. The words came out harsher than she intended, but she didn't take them back. I've got news for you. Jay's hollering. Neither do I. My parents are dead. My home is gone. And the only family I have left is a cousin I haven't seen in 5 years. You're not the only one whose life got stolen by evil men. They stared at each other across the lamp-lit room, both breathing hard as if they'd been running. Finally, Jace's shoulders sagged. Even if I agreed, which I'm not, you're not ready. Can barely hold a pistol steady. Don't know the first thing about tracking or survival in hostile territory. Then teach me. Caroline stood, moving around the table to face him directly. You've got all this knowledge, all these skills you learned to hunt one gang. Share them. Let me help. Why? His voice was rough. Why risk yourself for strangers? They're not strangers. They're women like me, with families and dreams and futures that are being stolen. And because... She hesitated, then forged ahead. Because I can't stand the thought of you facing this alone anymore. You saved my life. Let me help save others. Jace studied her face in the flickering light. You're serious about this? Completely. It would take time. Months of training before you'd be ready for anything beyond basic self-defense. I'm not going anywhere. Something shifted in his expression. Your cousin in Montana. Can wait. I'll write her. Explain I've been delayed. She'll understand. Caroline allowed herself a small smile. Besides, someone needs to make sure you eat regular meals and remember to sleep. I've managed 3 years on my own. Managed, not lived. She touched his arm lightly. When's the last time you had a conversation that wasn't about tracking or bounties? When's the last time you laughed? He looked down at her hand on his sleeve. You make it sound like you're doing me a favor. Maybe I am. Maybe we're doing each other favors. She withdrew her hand but didn't step back. Partners help each other. That's what you said the night we met, partnership. That was a lie to save your life. Was it? Seems to me we've been partners since the moment you stood up in that crowd and claimed me. Might as well make it official. Jay shook his head, but she could see he was weakening. You don't know what you're asking. Then tell me. Explain exactly what hunting McDale means. Let me make an informed choice. He moved back to the table, gesturing for her to sit. Then, with methodical precision, he laid out the reality of what she was proposing. The long days in the saddle, the nights sleeping on hard ground, the constant vigilance, never knowing if the next turn would bring an ambush, the violence, not clean and heroic like in stories, but ugly and brutal and haunting, Caroline listened without interrupting, though her stomach churned at some of the details. When he finished, she met his eyes squarely. "I understand, and I still want to help. You're either very brave or very foolish. My father used to say there wasn't much difference between the two." She managed a wry smile. "Will you teach me?" Jace was quiet for a long moment. Then, slowly, he nodded. "We start tomorrow. Dawn. And Caroline," his voice carried a warning, "I won't go easy on you because you're a woman. If you're going to ride with me, you need to be prepared for anything." "I wouldn't expect anything less." They shook hands across the table, a formal seal on their partnership. Caroline felt the calluses on his palm, the strength in his grip, and something electric passed between them. She pulled her hand back perhaps a bit too quickly. "I should turn in," she said. "Dawn comes early." "That it does." But Jace made no move to release her gaze. "Caroline, thank you." "For what?" "For reminding me there's still something worth fighting for besides revenge." The words hung between them, weighted with meaning neither was ready to fully acknowledge. Caroline nodded and retreated to her room, her heart beating faster than it should. As she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, she wondered what she'd just committed herself to. Learning to fight, to track, to hunt dangerous men, it was madness. Yet it felt right in a way nothing had since her parents' death. She had a purpose now, a reason to be more than just another victim. And if that purpose happened to involve staying close to a certain gray-eyed bounty hunter who looked at her like she might be his salvation, well, that was just an added complication she'd deal with when the time came. Dawn came like a slap of cold water. Caroline jolted awake to Jace's knock on her door, his voice carrying through the wood. "Sun's coming up. Time to start." She dressed quickly in the most practical clothes from the trunk, a divided skirt that would allow her to ride astride and a simple blouse. Her hands shook slightly as she buttoned it. What had seemed like a good idea in last night's lamplight felt more daunting in the harsh light of morning. Jace was waiting outside with 2 horses saddled. Not his black stallion, but a pair of smaller mounts, a bay mare and a paint gelding. "First lesson," he said without preamble. "Know your horse. This is Sage." He patted the mare's neck. "She'll be yours while you're here. Steady temperament, good instincts, fast when she needs to be." Caroline approached the mare carefully, letting the animal smell her hand before stroking the soft nose. "She's beautiful." "Beautiful doesn't keep you alive. Reliable does." He handed her the reins. "Mount up." The next hour was spent on horseback, but not riding. Jace had her practice mounting and dismounting until her legs burned, then showed her how to fall properly if thrown. "Land rolling, protect your head and organs. Better bruised than broken," he demonstrated, hitting the ground and rolling smoothly to his feet. "Your turn." Caroline looked at the hard-packed earth dubiously. "You want me to fall off the horse?" "I want you to know how to fall so when it happens, and it will happen, you don't break your neck." By the time they moved on to actual riding, Caroline's dress was dusty and her body ached in places she'd forgotten existed. But she didn't complain. This was what she'd asked for. "You ride well enough," Jace observed as they walked the horses in wide circles. "But there's a difference between riding for pleasure and riding for survival. When you're being pursued, every second counts." He taught her how to guide the horse with her knees, keeping her hands free, how to lie low over the horse's neck to present a smaller target, how to dismount at speed, using the horse as cover. When the sun reached its zenith, they took a break in the shade of the stable. Caroline's hair had come loose from its pins, hanging in damp strands around her face. She accepted the canteen Jace offered gratefully. "Still want to do this?" he asked, watching her closely. "Is this your way of trying to discourage me?" "This is my way of keeping you alive." His expression was serious. "We've covered maybe 1/10 of what you need to know. And that's just the riding." Caroline handed back the canteen and pushed herself to her feet. "Then we'd better get back to it." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Stubborn. Determined. The afternoon was devoted to firearms. Jace had set up targets, bottles and cans at varying distances. He started with the basics, showing her how to load and clean a revolver, how to sight properly, how to control her breathing. Most people think shooting is about the gun, he said, adjusting her stance. It's not. It's about the shooter. Steady hands, clear eyes, calm mind. Caroline's first shots went wild, missing even the closest targets. Frustration built with each failure. I'm terrible at this. You're learning. Jace moved behind her, his hands covering hers on the gun. Relax. You're fighting the weapon instead of working with it. His proximity was distracting, the warmth of his body, the way his breath stirred her hair. Caroline forced herself to focus on the target. Better. Now squeeze. Don't jerk. The shot rang out. The bottle exploded. I hit it. Once. Do it again. By evening, she could hit stationary targets more often than not. Her ears rang despite the cotton Jace had given her to stuff in them, and her arms ached from the weapon's weight. But progress was progress. As they cleaned the guns by lamplight, Jace said, Tomorrow we work on moving targets. After that, shooting from horseback. How long before I'm ready? For what to defend yourself? You're getting there. To hunt McDale. He shook his head. Months. If then, there's a difference between target practice and facing men who shoot back. Caroline set down the cleaning rod. Have you ever thought that maybe you've been going about this wrong? How so? You've been hunting them like a predator stalks prey. What if instead, we made ourselves the bait? Jace's hands stilled. Absolutely not. Hear me out. They target vulnerable women traveling alone or in small groups. What if nothing, I won't use you as bait? You wouldn't be using me. It would be my choice. The answer is no. His voice was flat, final. Caroline recognized the tone and didn't push. Not yet, but the seed was planted. The next weeks fell into a pattern. Physical training at dawn riding, falling, running, climbing, weapons practice in the afternoon, evenings spent studying maps and discussing strategy. Jace was a demanding teacher, but fair. He pushed her to her limits, but seemed to know instinctively when she needed rest. Slowly, Caroline felt herself changing. Her hands grew calloused, her reflexes sharper. She learned to read the land like Jace did, spotting potential ambush sites and escape routes. She could draw and fire in one smooth motion now, hitting center mass more often than not. But the biggest change was in how she carried herself. The fear that had clung to her since the kidnapping began to fade, replaced by confidence and capability. She was no longer a victim waiting to be rescued. She was becoming dangerous in her own right. One evening, after a particularly grueling day, they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of fire. Caroline was cleaning her revolver, now truly hers. Jace had said, earned through sweat and determination. Can I ask you something? She said. You usually do regardless. What will you do after when McDale is caught or killed? Jace was quiet for a long moment. Haven't thought that far ahead. In 3 years, you've never thought about what comes next. Didn't figure there'd be a next. Always assumed I'd die taking them down. The casual way he said it chilled her. That's not a plan. That's suicide. Maybe. He turned to look at her. What about you still planning on Montana? Caroline considered. The cousin in Montana felt like part of another life. One where she was still the minister's daughter who taught children their letters and tended her mother's garden. That woman was gone. I don't know anymore. I'm not the same person who started that journey. No, Jace agreed softly. You're not. Something in his tone made her look at him. The setting sun caught his eyes, turning the gray to molten silver. The moment stretched between them, charged with possibility. Then a coyote howled in the distance, breaking the spell. Jace stood abruptly. Early start tomorrow. We're going to practice tracking. Caroline watched him retreat inside, wondering if she'd imagined the longing in his eyes. Probably. Jace Halloran was still in love with a ghost. She was just the student, the partner, the complication he'd never asked for. But sometimes, in moments like these, she thought she saw something else. Something that suggested Emma's memory wasn't the only thing occupying his thoughts anymore. The next morning, true to his word, Jace led her into the desert to teach her tracking. He showed her how to read signs, broken twigs, disturbed pebbles, the subtle differences between animal and human prints. Everything leaves a trace, he explained, kneeling by a set of tracks. The trick is knowing what you're looking at. Caroline studied the marks in the dust. Rabbit. Good. How long ago? She examined the edges, remembering what he'd taught her about how wind and time affected prints. Few hours' edges are starting to soften, but aren't gone. Getting better. He stood, scanning the horizon. Question is, what was the rabbit running from? They followed the tracks, Jace pointing out where the gait had changed from hopping to fleeing. Eventually, they found the story's end tufts of fur and blood on the rocks. Hawk, probably, Jace said. See the wing marks in the dust? It was a small thing, reading the story of predator and prey written in the earth. But Caroline felt like she'd passed another test, moved one step closer to being ready. As they headed back, she noticed Jace had gone quiet, his usual teaching commentary absent. He kept scanning the horizon with more intensity than usual. What is it? Maybe nothing, but his hand had moved to rest on his gun. Thought I saw dust to the south earlier. Could be wild horses. But you don't think so? I think we should get back. They quickened their pace, Caroline's newly honed instincts screaming that something was wrong. As they crested the last rise before the house, Jace suddenly pushed her down behind a boulder. Stay here. What? But he was already gone, moving with that uncanny silence toward the house. Caroline peered around the rock, her heart hammering. 3 horses stood in the yard. 3 men lounged on the porch, making themselves at home. Even from this distance, she recognized one of them. Tom Brennan, McDale's right hand, the man who'd tried to buy her at auction. Her blood turned to ice as she realized what this meant. They'd found them. Whether by accident or design, the hunters had just become the hunted. Caroline pressed herself against the boulder, mind racing. 3 men at the house, Jace moving in alone. The math was bad, but she couldn't just hide while he faced them. She checked her revolver, fully loaded, then began circling wide, using the scattered rocks and scrub brush for cover. From her new position, she could hear voices carrying on the still air. A nice place you got here, hollerin'. Brennan's voice, lazy and mocking. Real cozy, though I heard you had company these days. Just passing through, boys. Jace stood relaxed in the yard, hands loose at his sides. What brings you to my doorstep? Now that's interesting. One of the other men, thin with a rattlesnake's disposition, spat tobacco juice. See, we heard different. Heard you picked up something that didn't belong to you in Dust Hollow. I pick up a lot of things. You'll have to be more specific. Brennan stood, hand resting on his gun. Don't play games. Hollerin', the woman. Where is she? What woman? The one you claimed as your wife. Real touching scene. From what I heard, course, we both know you ain't married. Not since that pretty little thing you were sweet on got herself taken. Caroline saw Jace's shoulders tense, but his voice remained steady. That's old history. Is it? See, the boss thinks maybe you've been holding a grudge. Thinks maybe you're the one who's been sniffing around our operations, picking off our boys when they stray too far from the pack. Your boss thinks a lot of things. Doesn't make them true. No, then you won't mind if we have a look around? The third man, stocky with mean eyes, was already moving toward the house. I mind plenty. Jace shifted slightly, a subtle adjustment that put him in a better position. "This is private property." Brennan laughed. "Private property. Listen to him. Boys, gone all civilized on us." His voice hardened. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to tell us where the woman is, and maybe we ride out peaceful-like. Or we tear this place apart, find her anyway, and leave you bleeding in the dust." Caroline knew she had to act, but not rashly. Jace had taught her better than that. She studied the men's positions, noted their weapons, calculated angles. The thin one had his back to her. If she could get closer. She moved silently. Every lesson Jace had drilled into her coming into play. Place each foot carefully. Use the wind to mask small sounds. Keep the gun ready, but don't draw until you're committed. "I told you," Jace was saying. "There's no woman here. Whatever female company I keep is my business." "Wrong answer." Brennan drew his gun in one smooth motion. Several things happened at once. Jace dove sideways, his own weapon clearing leather. The thin man spun toward movement he'd sensed behind him, and Caroline stepped out from cover, gun raised. "Drop it," she commanded. The thin man hesitated just long enough. Caroline's shot took him in the shoulder, spinning him around. His gun fell from nerveless fingers. Brennan swung toward her, but Jace's bullet caught him in the thigh, dropping him to one knee. The stocky man froze, suddenly outnumbered, his gun half drawn. "I'd think real careful about your next move," Jace advised him. The man slowly raised his hands. "Easy now. We're just talking." "Talking's over." Jace kept his gun trained on Brennan, who was cursing and clutching his bleeding leg. "Caroline, get their weapons." She moved carefully, as he'd taught her, never crossing Jace's line of fire. The thin man was moaning, holding his shoulder. She kicked his fallen gun away, then relieved the stocky man of his pistol. Brennan glared at her with pure hatred, but didn't resist when she took his weapon. "You're making a mistake, girl," he ground out. "You don't know who you're crossing." "I know exactly who I'm crossing." Caroline stepped back, keeping her gun ready. "The men who tried to sell me like cattle." Recognition flickered in Brennan's eyes. Well, so you are the auction girl. McDale's going to be real interested to know where you ended up." "McDale's going to have bigger problems," Jace said, starting with explaining to him how his right-hand man got shot up by a woman. Brennan's face flushed dark. "This ain't over." "No, it's not." Jace's voice was cold as winter steel. "But today's round goes to us. Caroline, get rope from the stable." She hurried to comply, returning with lengths of sturdy hemp under Jace's watchful eye. She tied the men's hands, remembering his lessons on knots that would hold but not cut off circulation. "Now what?" she asked when they were secure. "Now we have a conversation about what they're really doing here." Jace holstered his gun and crouched beside Brennan. "This wasn't random. You didn't just stumble across my place." Brennan spat, the spittle landing inches from Jace's boot. "Go to hell." "Already been. Didn't care for the company." Jace's voice was conversational, but Caroline heard the edge underneath. "Here's what I think. McDale's been wondering about the bounty hunter who's been cutting into his business. Maybe put some pieces together, figured out who's been tracking him." "You give yourself too much credit." "Do I? Then why are you here?" The thin man, pale from blood loss, spoke up. "Tom, maybe we should—" "Shut up, Peterson," Brennan snarled. Then, to Jace. "All right. Yeah, the boss knows about you, knows you've been hunting us. Figured it was time to deal with the problem." "Just the three of you." "We weren't expecting the woman to be armed." Brennan's gaze slid to Caroline. "Most of them aren't. After what we put them through." Caroline felt her finger tighten on the trigger, but Jace caught her eye, gave a tiny shake of his head. "Where's McDale now?" he asked. "Like I'd tell you." "You will, eventually." Jace stood. "But we'll start simple. There's a mining camp about 20 miles north. Silver Creek. That's where you were planning to take your next batch of women. Brennan's silence was answer enough. Thought so. See, I've been studying your patterns. You hit the emigrant trails, grab women traveling west, then move them through a series of way stations. Silver Creek's been due for a delivery. You don't know nothing. I know McDale's got a contact there. Saloon owner named Garrison, who runs girls in his back rooms. Jace began pacing. I know you were planning another raid within the week. Probably already have scouts watching the trails. The stocky man shifted nervously. Tom. I said shut up. But Jace had caught the tell. So I'm right. A raid's already planned. He stopped pacing, stared down at Brennan. When? You think I'm going to? Brennan's words cut off in a grunt of pain as Jace's boot connected with his wounded thigh. When? 3 days. The thin man, Peterson, broke. Stage route through Skeleton Canyon. Information says there's a church group heading to California. Families, including daughters. Peterson, you worthless? Brennan's curse was creative and extensive. Caroline felt sick. Families, daughters. More women who'd face what she'd nearly faced. Or worse. How many men? Jace demanded. Full crew. McDale himself is leading this one. Now it was Jace's turn to go still. McDale will be there. It's a big score. Lots of cargo. Peterson seemed to realize what he just revealed. His face went even paler. Jace and Caroline exchanged glances. This was it, the opportunity they'd been training for. McDale in the open, committed to a raid they knew about in advance. We have to warn them. Caroline said, The families. We will. Jace's mind was clearly racing. But this is also our chance. You're both fools. Brennan growled. You think you can take on McDale's whole gang? You'll be dead before you clear leather? Maybe. Jace drew his knife, and for a moment Caroline thought he meant to use it on the prisoners. Instead, he cut strips from Brennan's shirt to use as gags. Or maybe it's time someone reminded McDale that he's not untouchable. They gagged all 3 men. Then Jace dragged them to the stable, securing them in an empty stall. They'll work free eventually, he told Caroline, but not for a few hours, long enough for us to decide our next move. Back in the house, they spread out Jace's maps on the table. Skeleton Canyon was marked, a narrow passage through broken country. Perfect ambush spot. Jace said, high walls, limited escape routes. The stage won't stand a chance. Unless they're warned. Even then, McDale's not stupid. He'll have men positioned to cut off retreat. He traced possible routes with his finger. But if we're there first, we can't take on 8 men by ourselves. No, but we might not have to. Jace looked up at her. There's a marshal in Willow Springs, about a day's ride from the canyon. Federal man, not local. Ben Cooper, we've crossed paths before. He's straight, not in anyone's pocket. You think he'll help? If we can convince him a major raid is planned, yes. Question is whether we can get to him and back to the canyon in time. Caroline studied the map. What if we split up? One of us warns the marshal, the other scouts the canyon. Too dangerous. Everything we're discussing is dangerous. She met his gaze steadily. You've trained me for this. Trust me to do my part. Jace was quiet for a long moment. Then, you'd ride to the marshal? I know the canyon, can figure out McDale's likely positions. And if the marshal doesn't believe me? Tell him Jace Holleran sent you. Tell him it's about the McDale gang and Emma Hartwell. He'll listen. Caroline heard the weight in his voice when he said Emma's name. You've talked to him about her before. Once, when I first started hunting. Jace rolled up the maps. We need to move fast. Take Sage and the paint. Leave the outlaws' horses here. Pack light, ride hard. As they prepared to leave, Caroline caught Jace's arm. What happens to them? She gestured toward the stable. They'll get free eventually, make their way back to McDale. By then, It'll be too late to matter. And after, when this is over, he looked at her, and she saw something raw in his eyes. Let's survive first, then we'll worry about after. They rode out as the sun began its descent, two figures against the vast canvas of the desert. Behind them, muffled curses came from the stable. Ahead lay Skeleton Canyon, and a reckoning 3 years in the making. Caroline gripped Sage's reins and tried not to think about all the things that could go wrong. She'd wanted to help, to be more than a victim. Now she'd have her chance. She just hoped they'd both live through it. The rain started just after midnight, a sudden desert storm that turned the dirt to mud and made the rocky slopes treacherous. Caroline huddled deeper into her slicker, grateful for Jace's insistence on bringing foul weather gear despite the clear skies when they'd left. She'd reached Willow Springs late the previous evening, exhausted but determined. Finding Marshal Cooper had been easier than expected. The lawman maintained predictable habits, taking his evening meal at the same boarding house every night. "Jace Holleran sent me," she'd said without preamble when she found him. "It's about McDale and Emma Hartwell." The marshal, a grizzled man in his 50s with sharp eyes, had set down his coffee cup slowly. "You'd better sit down, miss, and tell me everything." Now, riding back through the storm with Cooper and 4 deputized men, Caroline prayed they wouldn't be too late. The marshal had believed her, especially when she'd shown him the wanted posters Jace had given her and recounted details only someone close to the investigation would know. "Canyon's just ahead," Cooper called over the rain. "If your man's information is right, McDale will hit the stage at first light." Caroline nodded, water streaming from her hat brim. Somewhere in those rocks, Jace was waiting, scouting alone. The thought sent cold fear through her that had nothing to do with the rain. Shenin. Jace lay prone on a ledge overlooking the canyon's narrowest point, oblivious to the rain soaking through his coat. He'd been in position since nightfall, watching McDale's men arrive in 1s and 2s, taking up their positions. His count matched Peterson's, 8 men, including McDale himself. The gang leader had aged in 3 years, his black beard now shot with gray, but Jace would have recognized him anywhere. This was the man who'd taken Emma, who'd destroyed so many lives. Jace's finger itched to squeeze the trigger of his rifle, but that wasn't the plan. One shot would alert the others, and the stage passengers would still be in danger. He needed Caroline to come through with the marshal, needed backup to ensure not just revenge, but justice. Movement below caught his eye. One of the Vasquez brothers was repositioning, moving to better cover. They were professionals. Jace had to give them that. The stage wouldn't stand a chance without warning. Thunder rolled overhead, masking the sound of approaching horses. Jace's heart jumped. Was that Caroline? But no, the riders were coming from the wrong direction. He watched through his field glasses as 2 more outlaws joined the ambush party. McDale was bringing in extra guns. The odds just got worse. Caroline and the lawmen dismounted a half-mile from the canyon, proceeding on foot to avoid detection. The rain had stopped, but clouds still obscured the moon, providing cover. "You sure Holleran's already in there?" Cooper whispered. He said he'd scout their positions, find the best approach. "Man's got sand, I'll give him that. Been hunting McDale like a man possessed ever since." The marshal trailed off, glancing at Caroline. "Well, you know." "I know." She checked her revolver for the 100th time. "He's not just hunting them for Emma anymore, though he's doing it for all the women they've hurt." "Maybe, but a man bent on revenge can be as dangerous as the men he's hunting. You watch yourself around Holleran. Miss, he's one of the good ones, but pain can twist even good men." Caroline wanted to defend Jace, but movement ahead silenced her. One of the deputies, a young man named Richards, was signaling. Outlaws spotted. They spread out, using the lessons Jace had taught her about moving through hostile terrain. Caroline found herself paired with Cooper. approaching from the eastern rim while the others circled west. The sky was lightening, false dawn painting the rocks in shades of gray. Soon the stage would come, carrying innocent families into a trap. A whistle, low, distinctive. Caroline's heart leaped. That was Jace's signal, the one he'd taught her for danger ahead, proceed with caution. She whistled back, the answering call that meant help has arrived. No one condone. From his position, Jace saw Caroline and the marshal approaching. Relief flooded through him, followed quickly by fear. The 2 extra guns had complicated things. 10 outlaws against 7 lawmen and Caroline, who despite her training had never been in a real gunfight. He needed to even the odds. Moving silently, Jace worked his way down from the ledge. The nearest outlaw was one of the new arrivals, positioned behind a cluster of boulders. Jace approached from behind, reversed his rifle, and brought the butt down hard. The man crumpled without a sound. 1 down, 9 to go. The eastern sky grew brighter. In the distance, Jace heard what he'd been dreading, the rumble of stage wheels on hard ground. They were out of time. He moved to the next position, but McDale's men were too spread out, too alert. He'd have to risk a shot, warn the stage even if it meant revealing his position. Then he saw Caroline. She'd worked her way onto a ledge opposite his former position. Cooper beside her. She had a clear view of the canyon floor and at least 3 of the outlaws. Pride mixed with terror in Jace's chest. His student had learned well, perhaps too well. The stage appeared around the bend, driver urging the horses through the narrow passage. 4 outriders accompanied it, guards hired for protection, but they wouldn't be enough against McDale's ambush. McDale stepped out from cover, rifle raised. "Stand and deliver." Everything happened at once. Cooper's voice boomed across the canyon. "Federal marshals, drop your weapons." The outlaws spun, caught between the stage guards and the lawmen. Gunfire erupted from multiple positions. The stage driver whipped his team, trying to run the gauntlet. Jace saw Miguel Vasquez drawing a bead on Caroline. Without hesitation, he fired. Vasquez tumbled from his perch, his shot going wild. Caroline and Cooper were pinned down, taking fire from 2 positions. Jace watched her return fire with cool precision, just as he'd taught her. One outlaw clutched his arm, cursing. The stage had pulled up short, passengers screaming. The guards had dismounted, using the coach for cover. One of the deputized men was down, clutching his side. Through the chaos, Jace tracked McDale. The gang leader had fallen back to a defensive position, shouting orders to his men, always the survivor, never taking unnecessary risks. Not this time. Jace abandoned cover, sprinting across open ground. Bullets whined past, but he didn't slow. 3 years of hunting, of dreams haunted by Emma's face, came down to this moment. He hit McDale like a thunderbolt, both men going down hard. They rolled in the dirt, fighting for control. McDale was bigger, heavier, but Jace had rage and years of preparation driving him. A knee to the ribs broke McDale's grip. Jace rolled clear, came up with his Colt drawn. McDale scrambled for his own weapon. "Don't!" Jace's voice cut through the gunfire. "It's over, McDale!" The outlaw leader froze, hand inches from his gun. Around them, the battle was winding down. Cooper's men had the upper hand, outlaws throwing down weapons and raising hands. "Hollerin'!" McDale's voice was calm, almost amused. "Should have known it was you. Still carrying a torch for that shopkeeper's girl." Her name was Emma Hartwell. Jace's gun never wavered. "You took her from me." "I take a lot of women. Can't remember them all." Rage nearly overwhelmed Jace's control. His finger tightened on the trigger. "Jace!" Caroline's voice, clear and strong. "Don't, he's not worth it." He risked a glance. She stood at the canyon's edge, silhouetted against the dawn sky, alive, safe. looking at him with those blue eyes that had somehow become as important as the gray ones that haunted his dreams. "Listen to your woman. Hollerin'," McDale said. "Though funny, isn't it you lost one to me? Now here you are with another. Maybe I'll take this one too." The gunshot was thunderous in the morning air. McDale looked down at the spreading red stain on his chest, surprise replacing arrogance. But it wasn't Jace who'd fired. Caroline stood with her revolver extended, smoke curling from the barrel. Her face was pale but determined. "He was going for his hideout gun," she said steadily. "I saw him reaching." Cooper appeared beside her, studied the scene. A derringer had indeed fallen from McDale's sleeve, inches from his twitching fingers. "Clear case of self-defense," the marshal pronounced. "Man was definitely going for a concealed weapon." McDale's eyes found Jace's. Guess you win after all." Blood bubbled on his lips. "The girl, Emma, she died brave." Then he was gone. 3 years of hunt ended not by Jace's hand, but by Caroline's. Jace stood slowly, holstered his weapon. Around them, Cooper's men were securing prisoners. The stage passengers were emerging, shaken but unharmed. The storm had passed, leaving the morning air crystal clear. Caroline descended from her perch, moving carefully around the bodies and debris of battle. When she reached Jace, she stopped just out of arm's reach. "You all right?" she asked. "Yeah." He looked at McDale's still form, waiting to feel something, satisfaction, perhaps, or emptiness. Instead, he felt only a strange lightness, as if chains he'd worn so long he'd forgotten their weight had suddenly fallen away. "You." "I've been better." Her voice shook slightly. In practice it was different." Without thinking, Jace pulled her into his arms. She came willingly, burying her face against his chest. He could feel her trembling and held her tighter. "You did what you had to," he murmured. "You saved my life." "He was reaching for the gun. I saw it. He was going to—" Her voice broke. I know. You did right." They stood like that while Cooper's men finished their work. When Caroline finally pulled back, her eyes were wet but clear. "It's over. Then McDale's gang. This bunch there'll be trials for the living, rope for those convicted. These families are safe. The women who might have been taken are safe. And are you safe now? Jace." He looked down at her. This woman who'd walked into his life as a victim and stood beside him as a warrior, who'd ended his quest not for revenge, but to save his life. "I think maybe I am," he said softly. "For the first time in 3 years, I think maybe I am." The sun broke fully over the canyon walls, bathing everything in golden light. The long night was over. What came next? Jace didn't know, but for the first time in years, he was curious to find out. The courthouse in Dust Hollow had never seen such crowds. Word of McDale's death and his gang's capture had spread like wildfire across the territory. Families of victims came seeking closure. Lawmen from 3 territories arrived to collect prisoners wanted for other crimes, and reporters from as far as San Francisco descended, eager to document the fall of the West's most notorious trafficking ring. Caroline stood on the courthouse steps, watching the circus with mixed emotions. 3 weeks had passed since Skeleton Canyon. 3 weeks of depositions, testimonies, and reliving moments she'd rather forget. But also 3 weeks of watching the surviving gang members face justice, of seeing families reunited with daughters they'd thought lost forever. "Miss Mercer." She turned to find a well-dressed woman approaching, perhaps 40 years old, with kind eyes behind wire spectacles. "I'm Helen Morrison from the Territorial Women's Aid Society. I wondered if I might have a word." Caroline glanced back at the courthouse, where Jace was still giving testimony. "Of course." They walked to a quiet spot beneath a cottonwood tree. "Mrs." Morrison studied her with intelligent eyes. "I've been following your story, Miss Mercer. what you've been through, what you've accomplished. It's remarkable. I had help. Yes, Mr. Holleran. Quite the partnership you've formed. There was no judgment in her tone, just observation. I'm here to make you an offer. The Society is establishing safe houses along the major travel routes, places where women traveling alone can find sanctuary. We need someone to help run them, someone who understands the dangers firsthand. Caroline's breath caught. You're offering me a position. More than that, a purpose, a chance to help other women avoid what you experienced. Mrs. Morrison handed her a card. The salary is modest but sufficient. You'd be based in Denver but would travel to inspect and establish new locations. I need to think about it. Of course. But Miss Mercer, women like you, survivors who fought back, you're exactly who we need. After Mrs. Morrison left, Caroline stood holding the card, her mind spinning. A job, a purpose, a life beyond. Beyond what beyond Jace? She looked back at the courthouse. Through the window, she could see him at the witness stand, steady and composed as always. These 3 weeks, they'd maintained a careful distance. The intimacy of that dawn embrace had frightened them both. Perhaps they'd returned to their roles of teacher and student, partner and partner, but nothing more. The trial was nearly over. Soon there would be no reason to stay in each other's orbit. The thought hurt more than it should. Quite the hero. You're Mr. Holleran. Caroline turned to find Tom Brennan being led past in shackles. His leg had healed enough for him to stand trial, though he still limped. His eyes held pure venom. Nothing to say, no quick draw to save him this time. He doesn't need saving. The truth is saving him just fine. Brennan laughed bitterly. The truth. You want the truth, girl. Your precious Jace ain't the noble knight you think he is. Man's got more blood on his hands than half the men in that courtroom. From bringing in bounties, legally. That what he told you? Brennan leaned closer, despite the marshal's restraining hand. Ask him about Cordova sometime. Ask him about the Bentley brothers. Ask him what happens when Jace Holleran decides the law ain't enough. The marshal yanked Brennan away, but his words lingered like poison. Caroline told herself it didn't matter. Whatever Jace had done in his years of hunting, she knew the man he was now. Didn't she? That evening, she found Jace at their old training ground outside town. He was practicing draws, the familiar motion smooth as water. She watched him for a moment, remembering her first clumsy attempts to match his speed. Heard you talking to Helen Morrison today, he said without turning. News travels fast. Small town. He holstered the Colt, faced her. It's a good opportunity. Yes. They looked at each other across the dusty ground where he'd taught her to shoot, to fight, to survive. When would you start? His voice was carefully neutral. She said as soon as the trials are over, maybe another week. Denver's nice. Good place to build a life. So I hear. Caroline took a breath. Jace, what are you going to do after this is all over? He was quiet for a long moment, looking out at the desert. Been thinking about that. Cooper offered me a deputy marshal position, federal appointment. Good pay. But I've been hunting men for 3 years. Not sure I want to make it the rest of my life. What do you want? The question hung between them like a challenge. Jace met her eyes, and she saw something raw there, quickly hidden. Doesn't matter what I want. Of course it matters. She stepped closer. You've spent 3 years living for the past. Maybe it's time to think about the future. With Emma gone. Emma's been gone for 3 years. The words came out harsher than intended. But Caroline didn't take them back. You honored her memory. You brought her killers to justice. But Jace, she wouldn't want you to die with her. His jaw tightened. You don't know what she'd want. No, but I know what I want. The words tumbled out before she could stop them. I want you to stop looking at me like I'm going to disappear. I want you to stop treating me like I'm made of glass. I want... What? His voice was rough. What do you want? Caroline. She looked at him. This man who'd saved her, trained her, stood beside her through hell and back, who still held himself apart, wrapped in old grief like armor. I want you to see me, not as the woman you rescued, not as your student, just me. Something shifted in his expression. He reached out, fingertips barely grazing her cheek. You think I don't see you, Caroline. I see you every time I close my eyes. See you standing on that ledge, brave as any soldier. See you facing down men who'd terrorized you. See you saving my life when I was too blind with rage to save myself. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Then why? Because you deserve better than a broken-down bounty hunter with blood on his hands and ghosts in his head. You deserve that new life in Denver, helping other women, building something good. What if I don't want to deserve better? What if I just want... He kissed her. It wasn't gentle or tentative. It was 3 weeks of careful distance crumbling, 3 years of loneliness breaking like a dam. Caroline kissed him back with equal fervor, pouring all her frustration and fear and hope into it. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Jace rested his forehead against hers. Caroline, don't... She pressed a finger to his lips. Don't tell me this is a mistake. Don't tell me I should go to Denver and forget this happened. I've had enough of people making decisions for my own good. I wasn't going to... He caught her hand, pressed it flat against his chest where she could feel his heart racing. I was going to ask if you'd consider a compromise. What kind of compromise? Take the job with the Aid Society. Help those women, but maybe don't go alone. Hope bloomed in her chest. Jace Holleran, are you proposing to accompany me to Denver? I'm proposing more than that. He pulled back enough to meet her eyes. I'm proposing we make it real this time. What I said that night at the auction about you belonging with me, I meant it. Even then, mean it more now. Caroline's breath caught. Are you asking me to marry you? I'm asking you to let me spend the rest of my life earning what you've already given me. Your trust. Your partnership. His thumb traced her cheekbone. Your heart, if I haven't lost it with my stubbornness. You haven't lost it? She turned her face into his palm. But Jace, what about Emma? I won't be second choice to a ghost. You're not second to anyone. His voice was fierce. Emma was my past. A good past. One I'll always honor. But you, Caroline, you're my present, my future, if you'll have me. Instead of answering with words, she kissed him again. This time, it was softer, deeper, full of promise rather than desperation. When they parted, she smiled. I suppose this means I should write to my cousin in Montana. Tell her I won't be coming after all. Might also mention you'll be traveling to Denver as Mrs. Holleran. Presumptuous, Mr. Holleran. Hopeful, Mrs. Holleran to be. They walked back toward town hand in hand, the setting sun painting their shadows long across the desert floor. Tomorrow there would be more testimony, more procedures to close the chapter on McDale's reign of terror. But after that, I've been thinking, Jace said. The Aid Society will need someone who understands the territories, knows the dangers, someone who can scout locations, ensure they're truly safe. Are you volunteering? If they'll have me. Figure a former bounty hunter might know a thing or two about keeping people safe. Caroline squeezed his hand. I think that can be arranged. As they reached the edge of town, she saw several women standing outside the hotel. Some she recognized from the rescue at Skeleton Canyon. Others who'd come forward during the trials. They watched her and Jace with expressions of gratitude and hope. From victim to protector. Jace murmured, You've come a long way from that auction platform. We both have, Caroline corrected. From hunter to guardian. From revenge to justice. To building something new from the ashes of the old. They paused at the hotel entrance. Inside, she could hear voices. Marshall Cooper, Mrs. Morrison. Others planning for a future where women could travel safely, where men like McDale couldn't operate with impunity. "No more running," Caroline said softly. "No more hunting, just living." "Together," Jace agreed. And for the first time since that terrible night in Dust Hollow, Caroline felt truly free, not just from captivity or fear, but from the past that had defined them both. Tomorrow they would help build a better world, but tonight they had each other. It was more than enough. It was everything. The small ranch outside Denver sprawled beneath the Colorado sky, its neat fences and freshly painted buildings a testament to 5 years of hard work. Caroline stood on the porch, watching their son Jacob chase chickens around the yard, his laughter bright as morning sunshine. "Easy there, little man." Jace called from the corral where he was working with a new mare. "Those hens provide our breakfast. Best treat them gentle." 3-year-old Jacob stopped his pursuit, considering this wisdom with the serious expression he'd inherited from his father. Then he toddled over to the fence, reaching up to be lifted. Jace obliged, settling the boy on his shoulders. Caroline smiled at the sight. Sometimes she still couldn't believe this was her life, this peace, this purpose, this family built from the ashes of tragedy. "Mrs. Holleran." She turned to find Sarah Chen, one of their current residents, approaching hesitantly. The young woman had arrived 2 weeks ago, fleeing an arranged marriage to a man 3 times her age. "What is it, Sarah?" "There's a rider coming. A woman, I think." Caroline shaded her eyes, studying the approaching figure. Sure enough, a lone woman on horseback was making her way up the ranch road. As she drew closer, Caroline recognized her, Mary Sullivan, one of the women they'd helped establish in Colorado Springs. Mary Caroline hurried down to meet her. "What brings you here?" Mary dismounted, her face glowing with excitement. "I had to tell you in person. The legislation passed. The Territorial Assembly approved funding for 10 more safe houses." Caroline's heart leaped. They'd been working toward this for 2 years, lobbying and petitioning and demonstrating the need. 10 more truly. From New Mexico to Wyoming, Mrs. Morrison says it's largely thanks to your reports and testimony. Mary gripped Caroline's hands. "Do you know what this means? How many women we can help now? I need to tell Jace." Caroline looked toward the corral where her husband was now teaching Jacob to brush the mare. "He's been mapping potential locations for months." "There's more," Mary said. "They want you and Mr. Holleran to oversee the expansion. Official positions with the territorial government. The governor himself signed the appointment." Caroline felt tears prick her eyes. From that auction platform to this, a voice for the voiceless, a protector of the vulnerable. God certainly worked in mysterious ways. That evening, after Mary had joined them for dinner and departed with promises to return soon, Caroline and Jace sat on the porch watching the sunset. Jacob played at their feet with a wooden horse Jace had carved, making galloping sounds. 10 more houses, Jace mused. That's a lot of traveling, a lot of time away from the ranch. We'll manage. We always do. Caroline leaned against his shoulder. Besides, Jacob loves the adventures. Don't you, sweetheart? Venture, Jacob agreed enthusiastically, making his toy horse jump over a porch board. Speaking of which, Jace said, producing an envelope from his pocket. This came today. Caroline recognized the handwriting immediately. From Helen. From Dust Hollow, forwarded through her. She opened it with trembling fingers. Inside was a brief note and a photograph. Dear Mrs. Holleran, my name is Grace Winters. You don't know me, but you saved my daughter. She was on the stage through Skeleton Canyon that day, because of you and your husband. She came home to me. She's married now, expecting her first child. We're naming the baby Caroline if it's a girl, Jace if it's a boy. God bless you both. With eternal gratitude. Grace. The photograph showed a young woman, radiant with pregnancy, standing beside a tall man who looked at her like she hung the moon. "Look at that," Jace said softly. "A life saved, a family continuing. Because you didn't give up, because you kept hunting even when the trail went cold. Because you reminded me there was something beyond the hunting." He kissed her temple. "I was planning to tell Emma's story to our children someday. How I failed her. How that failure drove me. And now I think I'll tell them a different story. About how sometimes the worst moments of our lives lead us to where we need to be. How your mother was brave enough to trust a stranger. And that stranger was smart enough to recognize courage when he saw it." Caroline touched the scar on his temple, faded now to a thin white line. No mention of the notorious outlaw hunting bounty hunter. Maybe when they're older. For now, let them think their parents are just boring ranch folks who happen to help women travel safely. "Mama, Papa." Jacob climbed into Caroline's lap, wooden horse clutched tight. "Story." "What story would you like, little one?" Caroline asked, settling him comfortably. "The one where Papa saved you." Jace and Caroline exchanged amused glances. Their son had heard a very simplified version of their meeting. No auctions or outlaws. Just a brave cowboy helping a lady in distress. "Actually," Jace said, "how about we tell you the one where your mama saved me?" Jacob's eyes widened. "Mama saved you?" "She did. See, I was very sad for a long time. Then I met your mama, and she was so brave and strong that she made me want to be brave and strong too." "And then what?" "And then," Caroline continued, "we decided to work together to help other people, and we fell in love and got married and had the best little boy in the whole world." "Me," Jacob announced proudly. "You," both parents agreed. As twilight deepened, they sat together on the porch of the home they'd built. In the distance, the lights of Denver twinkled like earthbound stars. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, safe houses to establish, women to protect, legislation to push through. But tonight, they had this family, purpose, peace. Caroline thought of that terrified woman on the auction platform 5 years ago. How certain she'd been that her life was ending. How wrong she'd been. "Penny for your thoughts?" Jace asked. "Just thinking about journeys, how we never end up where we think we're going." Disappointed, she looked at her husband, her son, her home, thought of the dozens of women they'd helped find safety, the laws they'd helped change, the future they were building. "Never," she said, "not for a single moment." Jacob had fallen asleep in her arms, tiny face peaceful in the porch light. Jace helped her carry him inside to his bed, the nightly ritual as precious as any they'd created. As they prepared for bed themselves, Caroline noticed Jace standing by the window, looking out at the star-filled sky. "What is it?" "Just thinking. 5 years ago tonight, I was camped alone in the desert, planning how to attend that auction without being recognized. Never imagined I'd end up here." "Regrets?" He turned to her, eyes warm with love. "Only that it took tragedy to bring us together. But maybe that's how life works. Beauty from ashes, joy from sorrow. And purpose from pain," Caroline added, moving into his arms. They stood together in the quiet of their room, holding each other as they'd done that first dawn after the battle at Skeleton Canyon. But now there was no desperation, no fear, only the deep contentment of two souls who'd found their way home. Outside, a coyote called across the prairie, answered by another. The sound that had once meant danger now seemed almost like a benediction, wild things communicating across the darkness, confirming they were not alone. Neither were Caroline and Jace. Not anymore. They had each other. They had their son. They had their mission. And they had the knowledge that every safe house they built, every woman they helped, was a victory over the darkness that had once threatened to consume them both. The night deepened. The stars wheeled overhead. And in a ranch house outside Denver, two people who'd found love in the most unlikely circumstances held each other close and dreamed of all the lives they'd yet to save. In the morning, There would be work to do. There always was. But for now, they had this peace, purpose, and the promise of tomorrow. The coyotes sang their ancient song. The prairie wind whispered through the grass. And somewhere in the great tapestry of the West, another thread of hope was woven into the pattern of history. Their story had begun with cruelty and captivity. It continued now with compassion and courage. And it would echo through the years in every woman who traveled safely because of the paths they'd helped create. This was their true victory, not the fall of McDale's gang, but the rise of something better in its place. Love conquering fear, hope defeating despair, and the endless possibility of redemption for those brave enough to reach for it. The stars looked down on the sleeping ranch, guardian lights in the vast western sky, and if heaven was watching, perhaps Emma Hartwell smiled to see the man she'd loved find happiness again, not in spite of his loss, but because of how he'd chosen to honor it. Some stories end with sunset. Theirs had truly begun with a sunrise in Skeleton Canyon. Every dawn since had been a gift, a chance to build something worthy of the prices they'd paid. And they had, Thank you so much for listening to this Wild West love story. I hope Caroline and Jace's journey touched your heart as much as it touched mine while sharing it. I'd love to know where you're listening to this story. Please share in the comments below so we can connect and discuss what resonated with you. If you enjoyed this tale of redemption and courage, please subscribe to Wild West Stories 1850 for more authentic stories from America's frontier. Don't forget to like this video and hit the hype button to help more people discover Caroline and Jace's inspiring story. Until our next adventure in the Old West, partners.